I'm Courtney Collins, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's start with a check of your Bloomberg's first word news. President Obama met with press today for the first time since the election of Donald Trump.
We are indisputably in a stronger position today than we were when I came in 8 years ago. My instructions to my team are that we run through the tape. We make sure that we finish what we started, that we don't let up in these last couple of months.
Meanwhile, former Goldman Sachs banker Steve Mnuchin has been recommended by Donald Trump's team to serve as Treasury Secretary. That's according to two people familiar with the process. The choice is said to be awaiting the president-elect's final decision. The Securities and Exchange Commission says the agency's head, Mary Jo White, will leave office at the end of the Obama administration. White was appointed by President Obama in 2013, and her term doesn't end until 2019. And a United Nations spokesman says more than 54,000 people have fled their homes because of the military operation to retake the Iraqi city of Mosul from Islamic State. About 3/4 of the people are sheltered in camps set up by the UN. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Courtney Collins. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg Technology is next.
I'm Corey Johnson in for Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, the post-election tech rout continues as investors speculate what a Trump presidency could mean for Silicon Valley. We'll discuss the outlook for the industry. Plus, Facebook in the eye of the post-election storm. CEO Mark Zuckerberg strikes back at critics who say the social media site swayed the presidential race. And Samsung making an $8 billion bet on connected cars at buying Harman International. More details ahead, but first to our lead tech stocks. Continuing to slide in the wake of Donald Trump's election. Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, the FANG stocks. Of course, FANG's Google parent Alphabet, really, but we'll still call it FANG because it sounds better than FANA. But they're all lower today. A forced 4-day drop since February for those stocks. Investors are wondering whether President Trump will follow through on some of his protectionist policies outlined by candidate Trump, including a 45% tariff on Chinese imports. The Chinese state-run newspaper responded Monday, writing that the nation would, quote, take a tit-for-tat approach. And that Apple's iPhone sales in particular would suffer a setback. Apple shares down more than 4% over the last 4 days. Joining us right now for some perspective on this, try to figure out what tech might look like under the Trump administration, Techonomy CEO and Bloomberg contributor David Kirkpatrick, and Witness Crespi Hart and Company analyst James Chalkmark, who covers Facebook, Amazon, Alphabet, among others.
Yes.
James, you had a terrific note out this morning, I thought, about potential impacts. And I just want to maybe take a few of these apart for both of you, and we'll kind of unpack it. So the first thought was, in Silicon Valley, we love immigration. In Silicon Valley, we have so many great companies from Intel to Google, founded by people from other countries, that we depend on people with H-1B visas to program for these companies. But your take is that it's not going to be the most important thing. Why do you think immigration is not going to be the most important thing for Silicon Valley?
Yeah, we actually think trade, is a bigger deal for that. But when you think about immigration, what does Trump really want to do? When you hear his talk at the rallies, and ever since he's been elected, is that it's about creating jobs here. And when you think about what the technology industry is doing, they're not actually as much disenfranchising American workers as they are hiring the best of the best. When you look at the global talent force. And at the same time, when you think about the supply, just simple supply and demand, there's a lot more demand for these technology jobs than there is supply. So that's why we just don't see H-1B visas being as top priority as some of the other uncertainties.
David?
Well, my thought when I hear that, because I assume what you're saying, James, is that if he takes his trade actions, Apple iPhones are going to have tariffs put on them or whatever. That's my opinion is that is simply not going to happen, because if he were to take many or even most of the trade actions that he's promised, the global economy, and particularly the U.S. economy, would go into a very discernible tailspin.
Like getting rid of NAFTA.
Just to name one. There's so many things. I mean, this is a very delicate balance. The value of the dollar, who holds our debt, our trade balance in both directions, whether we buy imports or not. If he really messes with that in any direction too much, you risk creating a disequilibrium that really could be very damaging to the economy, damaging to the people who elected him. And I'm sure that he's going to have some relatively smart people whispering in his ear and reminding him of that.
Yeah. A note that was nowhere near as good as yours this morning, but Tony Sacconaghi at Bernstein, and if Tony was sitting here, I would be talking about how lousy your note was. But Tony Sacconaghi at Bernstein had a really interesting note today where he talked, really focused on taxes and repatriation. And I thought one of his really interesting takes was on a dollar-weighted basis, if you look at the S&P 500 in taxes, that non-tech companies pay a lot more in taxes. Now, to some of us, that's just kind of a duh, because a lot of even S&P 500 companies in technology don't have profits. So, of course, companies like Salesforce will pay less in taxes. but the tax rate paid by non-tech companies, I think we've got a graphic that even shows it, that on a dollar-weighted basis, again, 17.9% is the average tax rate of tech companies in the S&P 500, whereas it's 24.6% of the rest of the companies in there, which suggests that a tax cut won't actually help tech companies. So maybe this sell-off makes some sense. Maybe the rebalancing of an S&P 500 portfolio would have a little bit less tech because it would have less success in a new in a tax-cutting administration.
Yeah, but at the same time, you got to bring the cash back. I mean, we have trillions of dollars sitting overseas, right?
Right.
And if we can do it in a way that's not just done on a single basis, but rather on a perpetual basis, where we know that it's not a one-time stimulus, but a prolonged one. So I do think that there is opportunities, for these companies, because I talk to these companies, right? They tell me that if they had the opportunity to bring it back, they would. Several years ago, eBay tried to bring their $3 billion back, but they couldn't, because everybody was up in arms. Why would you want to pay 40 cents, 50 cents on the dollar to bring this money back? But they have an opportunity.
But that's great.
You know what I mean?
That's great for these companies, though. Yeah. Why should their stocks be dropping if that might happen? I mean, come on.
Well, but to that point,
and it's great for the American economy.
So which is to say, Wall Street could be stupid here. I mean, if you look at Apple,
that never happened.
Shocker. The company that has the highest tax rate and the most amount of money overseas is Apple. Right. The very company that could benefit the most from this kind of tax rate.
I think that there is an overreaction right now, because there's a lot of uncertainties going on, but at the same time, there's not going to be something to completely destroy everything that's been established. Trade, yes, the focus is to bring back jobs, all the outsourced manufacturing and whatnot, but if it's done with the proper incentives, tax incentives to actually encourage that behavior, it probably will be a lot more muted than people expect.
Yeah, we're in a time of bizarre uncertainty, but that's one thing that's almost certain, is the repatriation of those profits, because both sides really said they were going to do that, right? But if you don't like uncertainty, it is a pretty dicey time. There's no question. But my own view, I am just not feeling apocalyptic. I feel like I read this great article today by Zachary Karabell, who you probably know, really smart guy, saying, this is the same mood that the country fell into after the election of Nixon, after the election of Reagan. And I remember I was going to leave the country when Reagan was elected. It was that bad. That's the way we felt. And these things settle in and the republic survives. And probably the tech industry, too.
James, you also highlighted some other issues that were...
Yeah, look, I'm optimistic. I'm an eternal optimist.
We're going to have a Dave Chappelle moment right now. We're going to have a Dave Chappelle moment.
It's a good moment to have.
No, that was a good segment, by the way. But there are two things that are on the back of my mind. One is net neutrality, because he hasn't really taken a position on that, because we do want all content to be treated equally. And we know that the Republicans in the House...
the FCC has a really big role here, and the FCC has been very aggressive on President Obama.
Right, so if there is a turn of that, actually what that could do is, not only empower the broadband companies, but at the same time potentially increase the likelihood of a Netflix acquisition. And then the second thing is on jobs, versus robots, is how I put it in the note, is because if you're talking about job creation and we're moving toward an automated world, where everything is being taken over by robots, it could potentially slow down the implementation of technology in general, across industries.
And so on.
Right.
Interesting times, want them or not, we got them, and I think it is a great mystery to see what's going to happen with this administration. I'm really glad to have you two here. David, you're going to stay with me for some more. James, you're out here. James Chakmak, Vanessa Crosby and Harper, we're still going to see you later this week, and David Kirkpatrick is going to stay here. But for now, thank you. All right, well, staying with stocks, 13F filings been rolling in throughout the day, giving us a look at what tech companies are held by which money managers and which financial institutions like tech, which ones don't. Well, shares of Twitter up after the hedge fund Jana Partners and Highland Capital, both known to be active as shareholders, added stakes to the company. On the other hand, investors are divided on the outlook for Alibaba. One of the early investors, Temasek Holdings, pared its stake on the e-commerce giant. Tiger Global, however, adding shares, notably Tiger, their decision to cut Amazon and double down on Apple. Coming up, Facebook's attempting to come to terms with its huge influence as a news platform after the U.S. presidential election. But how will the world's biggest social media company work to fact-check its news feed, or should it not even bother? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. This is Bloomberg. Well, another bit of deal news this merger Monday. Google disclosing it bought Undecidable Labs last month. It's a startup focused on turning online searches into purchases. The acquisition suggests that Google's making further moves to make profits out of its massive image library. And remember to stay with us later in the hour. You're going to be hearing from YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki, who once led that Google image search business. Right after the U.S. election, Mark Zuckerberg said the notion of a Facebook effect on the election was, quote, a pretty crazy idea. But over the weekend, he wrote a more complex post response, concluding, quote, I am confident we can find ways for our community to tell us what content is most meaningful, but I believe we must be extremely cautious about becoming arbiters of truth ourselves. Economy CEO David Kirkpatrick, who wrote a book called The Facebook Effect, back with me right now,
and to whom he said that it was a crazy idea on stage at my Techonomy conference.
Take a little bit of that. I saw that.
I just had to say that.
Deserved. This gets to the heart of what Facebook has been from the start. Should it be a place where, or even the heart of the internet, is it a place where people are responsible for what they put out, or is the host of that information responsible?
Well, the bias in the company's history has always been toward the former, a platform for the interaction of its members, basically a platform, the content comes from you and me, right? But I think what's happened is the scale of Facebook's impact on society, the scale of its diversity in variety of services that it offers, it isn't tenable to just be that anymore. And I think they know that at Facebook. But I think there's a little bit of maybe even an existential crisis, like what are we and how do we live up to what we now are? Because it's easy to forget. People love to just sort of badmouth Facebook or criticize them for whatever they do. This is a company with almost 2 billion users globally. That's never happened before for any company, any industry, right?
There's never been a 2 billion person community.
And it has personal data on all those people. It has, all of them are sharing news of all kinds about themselves, about their brother, about their dog, about their country, about the pothole on their street. And, that's a new environment. They have a lot of systems in place. I think they've done a pretty darn good job managing it, but they have to do a better job.
Yeah, it's not just pictures of soup. To that point, with this sound, by the way, we've got a clip from your conference last week where he said this to you. So check out what Mark Zuckerberg actually had to say.
Okay, good.
Personally, I think the idea that fake news on Facebook, of which it's a very small amount of the content, influence the election in any way, I think is a pretty crazy idea.
So I don't imagine he's telling advertisers that the pages that they're advertising on have very little impact and nobody actually pays any attention to them.
Yeah, but it's a matter of the percentage of news stories that were fake is less than 1%. So, I think it's really interesting to ask yourself, okay, if Facebook were the arbiter of truth, how do they do that? Truth is a very hard thing to define.
You have
in
been
many
journalists
instances.
for a long time.
I know. Okay, you know how much fact-checking it would take in a typical Fortune story when I was at Fortune to ensure that it was true? Like 3 days worth, if it was like a 3,000-word story. It's not easy. I don't deny that Facebook has to do much better. I do think they're taking this whole thing gravely seriously, very seriously. They are somewhat taken aback by the pushback they're getting, and they are working to figure out how they should respond because they feel they have to do more. And I think Zuckerberg's note over the weekend shows that. But I don't think it's easy.
And there was this great piece in the New York Times this week and also suggested it wasn't just Zuck, right? It was that their senior management at Facebook had kind of a staff-wide freak out about this, where they said, hey, do we need to do something differently? Do we need to radically change the way our business works?
Right.
Because we may have contributed to false information helping people make decisions in the campaign.
Interesting to keep in mind, that's happening at every major news organization also.
Yeah.
And I don't say Facebook is just a media company. That's one of many things they do. If the New York Times, the Washington Post, these places are all freaking out internally. They're getting a lot of pushback from their readers, and they're having an existential crisis because everybody got it wrong, and they're thinking, are our systems somehow wrong that we missed it? So it's not just Facebook. Facebook is the biggest, the richest, the most in your face.
Well, and to the point, some breaking news here from Google. Reuters reporting that Alphabet's Google is working on a policy to update and to restrict ads from being placed on fake news sites.
That's
so to
great.
take away the oxygen that is helping them create revenue. But Facebook isn't doing that.
Well, the kind of thing they might be able to do would like get authentication somehow for media properties. So, these people in wherever it is.
Macedonia. There's this infamous
Macedonia,
story.
where they're making up news organizations
let's tell the
and
story.
publishing
So
fake
in
news.
Macedonia, there apparently were a small handful of people creating hundreds of posts that were fake, but were generating a lot of clicks. They were clickbait,
right.
And they were very popular in Facebook.
Selling ads.
And who made money? The Macedonian guys made money, and Facebook made money off of this.
True. So if it wouldn't be that hard, it seems to me, to have some kind of authentication for media organizations that would prevent that. I think that could be done. And I bet they do introduce something like that in the not distant future.
We shall see. We'll give you credit for that idea when it happens, if Alphabet doesn't
I
get
don't think
first.
it was my idea.
Tech Economy CEO David Kirkpatrick is going to stay with us. I appreciate that. All right, another story we're watching. The U.S. government's going to require new hybrid and electric cars to make noise when traveling at low speed. So pedestrians, especially those who are can't see, people are blind, people with poor eyesight, so they can hear the car coming. Auto industry regulations say the new rule could help prevent 2,400 pedestrian injuries a year. Well, coming up, could Uber get the last laugh in China? Tighter regulations on the ride-hailing companies could make Didi's business a lot tougher really soon. We're going to head to Hong Kong for the details next. This is Bloomberg. And Samsung's making moves in the automotive technology business. The company's agreeing to buy Harman International Industries for about $8 billion in cash. Harman makes high-end car audio and is a leader in connected car technologies. Harman's CEO, based in Connecticut, says Korean Samsung is a good fit.
Both Samsung and Harman believe this transaction is an ideal strategic fit that will maximize our complementary strengths. Samsung's global scale, R&D capabilities, and distribution channels will provide Harman the resources to broaden our technology portfolio, expand our reach, and accelerate the introduction of industry-first solutions.
And sticking with the car business, it's only been a few months since the ride-sharing giant Didi Chuxing bought out Uber's operations in China. But now the Chinese cities are planning to enforce tighter ride-sharing rules, only allowing local city residents to drive car-hailing apps and selecting what kind of cars they can drive. This policy goes into effect. Uber's deal with Didi might give Travis Kalanick his last laugh. Joining us right now from Hong Kong, Bloomberg's Lulu Chen, and still with us, David Kirkpatrick from Tech Economy. Lulu, let me start with you. Tell us about these rules. What are the rules proposed in terms of both the residency and the vehicles themselves?
So China's largest cities have rolled out tighter policies, draft rule policies, requiring only local residents, for example, in Beijing and Shanghai and Tianjin, to drive these private car-hailing apps. All the other cities, the 24 other cities, have said that they require locally registered cars to run on the roads, and they also have higher requirements on what types of vehicles can run on the roads. That would be a huge blow to Didi, especially for the private car-hailing business, and that's a significant part of their revenue. When we talk to drivers on the road these days, they say that the government and Didi both have not sent them messages telling them not to use the apps if they're not locally registered, but there are police raids carried out in certain parts of the cities these days.
Having spent last weekend in Los Angeles and this last couple of days in New York, I've had it with traffic. Is this really about traffic and the government's response to increasing traffic and starting to blame the ride-hailing apps?
Well, there's a discordance between the central government and the local administrations. If you look at the central government, they have legalized these car-hailing apps. But at the local level, because the city governments are in charge of issuing a lot of the permits for the taxi actual operations, and so this is probably a pushback from the cab drivers and the companies behind them, where they actually take a cut from the operating revenues. And so for Didi coming in and bringing millions more drivers, it is a blow to their business, and that's probably where we're seeing some of this pushback from.
It's really interesting, too, because it would seem, David, that they had the inside track of this being a Chinese company operating in China, and the government was going to favor them. That certainly happened on the national level.
Well, I'll tell you another way why it could make Uber feel glad they're not the ones involved. I mean, the answer probably is to go with the point that we just heard about the greasing of the palm, basically, of the government officials and the local government by the taxi industry. That's probably how Didi's going to have to get out of it. They're going to have to start basically paying more people, not bribery necessarily, but fees somehow. It just gets more expensive to do business, and it becomes less of a super cheap alternative form of transportation. That was probably inevitable anyway, but it is so hard for Western companies to do business in China because of the whimsicality of the regulatory regime that I think Uber was super fortunate to get out with such a big payoff.
Whimsicality.
Yes. I'm a writer. What do you want?
Whimsicality is fine with me. There was a thought that one of the things that Uber was doing by stemming the losses in China was taking a step closer to an IPO. And I wonder if you get the sense, not just with Uber, but some of these unicorn companies are starting to think about cashing out their investors, growing up a little bit, and becoming reporting in publicly traded companies. Uber especially.
I think in general that may be happening, but I don't sense it as much at Uber as at some of the other companies. I think Uber is feeling kind of comfortable being able to raise capital at these astronomical private valuations. And frankly, if you look at Facebook's situation that we were talking about earlier on the show, if they had never gone public, they'd be able to do a lot of things to respond to situations that are putting them in a difficult position now that they cannot do when they have to keep churning the advertising crank to please Wall Street. So I could see Travis Kalanick being sympathetic to not going public.
Lula, really quick, just about 20 seconds here. Do you think this is going to get resolved on a national level, or is it going to get resolved on a local level?
So Didi is providing feedback to the local bureaucracies these days. They're saying that they're more open to moderating the versions of the policies that has yet to be finalized. So we'll see in terms of how, they negotiate with the governments.
Yeah, we certainly will. It's quite a big story here, and it's going to really affect the way this country develops in terms of transportation. Lulu Chen, thank you very much. Great story from our Hong Kong bureau, Lulu Chen, who covers things for us out there in Hong Kong. And David Kirkpatrick from Techonomy, thank you very much as well. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Corey.
All right, well, coming up, YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki tells us about all of her plans to take original programming, quote, to the next level on the video streaming site YouTube. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on radio. Check me out on radio. You can listen to the Bloomberg Radio app, BloombergRadio.com, and on US, it's Sirius XM station number 119. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Courtney Collins, and you're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of Bloomberg's First Word News. President Obama says Donald Trump told him he can assure European leaders the U.S. will not back off its commitments to the NATO alliance. President Obama spoke with reporters today before his last trip to Europe as president.
There is no weakening of resolve when it comes to America's commitment to maintaining a strong and robust NATO relationship, and a recognition that those alliances aren't just good for Europe, they're good for the United States.
European Union foreign ministers have reaffirmed their support for the Iran nuclear agreement, which Donald Trump has vowed to renegotiate. Top EU diplomats are also calling for a more robust European defense and a greater European voice in world affairs. Turkey's foreign ministry is issuing a travel warning for the United States, citing dangers linked to protests and possible assaults by racists after the election of Donald Trump. The notice advises Turks living in traveling to the U.S. to avoid areas around the protests. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,600 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Courtney Collins. This is Bloomberg. And it's just after 6:30 p.m. Monday here in New York, 10:30 a.m. Tuesday morning in Sydney. I'm joined by Bloomberg's Paul Allen with a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good Good morning, Courtney. Let's take a look at the ASX. Been trading for just over 30 minutes now and not looking too good. Off 0.75% at the moment. Leading the declines is OFX Group, the online payments provider, after a disappointing set of earnings. The Reserve Bank of Australia will release the minutes of its November meeting in a little under an hour's time. The RBA, of course, keeping the cash rate on hold at the record low 1.5% at that meeting. The World Interest Rate Probability Index from Bloomberg suggests just a 4% chance of a cut from the RBA in December. The Governor, Philip Lowe, is going to be giving a speech in Melbourne a little later this evening. Have a look at New Zealand at the moment. The NZX performing reasonably well, up a little more than 0.1% right now, although Tower Insurance is off slightly. That's despite the insurer saying its liability from the quake yesterday or on Monday is going to be just a little over $5 million. The biggest job there is going to be rebuilding New Zealand's major arterial route, State Highway 1. Over in Japan, keep an eye on those big bands, Mitsubishi UFJ and Mizuho, after better than expected earnings. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Corey Johnson in for Emily Chang. We're now to our long-form interview show, Bloomberg Studio 1.0. This week, we're bringing you the story of Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube. She started as Google's 16th employee and in 2006 wrote the original business plan for Google to buy YouTube for $1.65 billion. We spoke with her on the 10-year anniversary of the acquisition and kicked off our conversation back at the beginning, back in 1998, that is, when Google's co-founders Larry Page and Sergey Brin first set up their very first office in her Menlo Park garage.
I wish I could say I had a great eye and I picked them out as students, out of all the students at Stanford, and I said, oh, come and rent my garage. I wish I could tell you that, but it didn't work that way. What happened was I bought a house, and houses are really expensive in Silicon Valley, and I was a student, and so I wanted someone to help me pay the mortgage. They were looking for space, and there were just the two of them, and they had one employee. And space was also really expensive, and so the idea that they could just move into my garage quickly and easily at a relatively low cost for them was really appealing. And so they just moved in.
Your mom was a teacher, your dad was a physics professor at Stanford, you have two sisters, Anne, who's the founder of 23andMe, Janet, who's an epidemiologist. Tell me about a day in the life in the Wojcicki household.
So first of all, we grew up on the Stanford campus. And so it meant that all of the neighbors that we had were professors around us, which I think definitely influenced us because everybody was studying to do something and had a passion. And so I'm the oldest, and I would say I'm like maybe the more practical one as the oldest one. And, growing up, I was also really creative. I always loved making things, and I think that's actually what led me to computers in the end.
How did you parlay your history and literature degree at Harvard, by the way, into becoming the CEO of a giant technology company?
So I studied history and literature at Harvard. I had no idea that I was going to go into technology at all. If you had told me that when I was a student, I would have thought you were completely crazy. I used to come home and I used to do these temp jobs when I would come home from college. So I'd have a week free and I would just call a temp service and say, just place me anywhere. And one time I was at a lawyer. Another time I actually got placed at the garbage company to answer the phone. And the third time I got placed at a startup. And I realized wow, they can use technology and they have these big ambitions. And I thought, that's really cool. I want to be part of it. So when I went back and I was a senior, I decided to take a computer science class at Harvard, which was crazy because there was no other humanities senior taking a computer science class. But it was really good. I got a good basis. And then when I moved back home, I came to Silicon Valley and I was able to get a job. And I've been there ever since.
You were Google's 16th employee, first marketing manager. You worked on Google Doodles, Google Images, Google Books. You built the ad business. How many hats have you worn in 18 years?
I think when you join a startup, you just sort of have to be willing to do whatever the startup needs you to do. But part of it also was that because maybe I didn't have as fixed a role at first, I was always looking for the opportunity. And so I was like, oh, look, there's an opportunity. Like nobody else is working. For example, when I worked on image search, I was like, no one else is working on image search. Like there are all these other people, they're working on the text search, but images would be really cool. And today that's a really popular search. So I think doing lots of things and having the freedom to move around the company actually enabled me to see a lot of opportunities and then grow them.
It's been 10 years since Google bought YouTube, and you wrote the original justification plan, as I understand it, that convinced Larry and Sergey to buy the company. What did you see back then?
I did a spreadsheet. That was one of my contributions, but I also believed in YouTube. There was this one video that we had, and that video convinced me and showed me that people all over the world can create content and be entertaining. And so the video was of these two students in their dorm room, and their roommate's in the background doing his homework, and they're singing to the Backstreet Boys, and they are incredibly funny. I still laugh when I watch it, and that was our first hit. And I realized that people all over the world can be creative and funny, and that other people want to watch it. And I thought, wow, if it continues like this and it continues to grow, this is going to be a big phenomena.
I always hear this about YouTube. It's become so much, but it could be so much more.
Well, I think the growth has been amazing. The fact that we have 1 billion people who use YouTube every month is, that's a big number. And Variety did this study where they went and they asked teens, who are your stars? And in 2015, they said that 8 of the top 10 of their stars were YouTubers.
It's been almost 3 years now since you became CEO. What's the personal stamp that you want to put on the company?
Well, it's been really fun. I love being at YouTube. I love hearing and meeting the creators. I love the creative aspect of it. I love the way entertainment is being opened up to anyone. And I also really care deeply about the value that we have, the freedom of expression, and the fact that people all over the world can use it to tell their story. When I think about what do we want to do with YouTube and where do we want to grow it, video has never been easier to create. It's never been easier to watch. And so we think about ourselves as a platform for the next generation of media companies to be able to create content and to distribute it to the world. And we also want to work with traditional media companies so that that content can be redistributed to all the millennials that are on the platform.
Now, some analysts estimate the value of YouTube is $70 billion. That it could easily be a standalone company. Why isn't it a standalone company, even within the Alphabet family?
It's an important part of Google. And we benefit from a lot of things being part of Google. So first of all, we run on Google infrastructure. And then we also benefit from Google's ad sales team that sells our inventory. But within YouTube, we are a company within Google. And so we have all parts that a company has, sales, marketing, engineering. And so we have some of the benefits of being within Google, but then are able to be a standalone brand within the company.
And that was Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube. We'll have next more of our exclusive interview, including Wojcicki's thoughts on balancing work and life at Alphabet. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology. I'm Corey Johnson for Emily Chang. Well, turning back with our interview with YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. Well, as a mother of 5, Wojcicki talks about being a working parent and the importance of diversity in tech. Take a listen.
The main thing for me has been to focus and prioritize. And so I'm really, really good about saying this is my work time. And when I'm in the office, I am really, really focused on what I'm doing and I'm prioritizing. And I've always kind of thought about, well, how do I get from point A to point B as quickly as possible? Because I don't have forever. I can't stay there until midnight. I can't work weekends. And so in some ways it actually caused me to see some of the shortcuts, some of the new opportunities, because I was thinking about well, how do I grow this faster? How do I grow really quickly? Let's just forget about all those other things that are growing slowly. They're not going anywhere. I'm I don't have time for that. I got to focus on the big ideas, and we got to get them done now. And so that actually is really good in tech, right? Because tech is about growing big ideas quickly. And so I use my work time to focus on that. And then when I get home, I really try to focus on my family and my kids. My husband's very helpful. And realistically, to be fair, like as I've risen in my career, I've been able to have more help at home. I think the hard part, and when I really struggled, was when I had my first baby. I didn't know what I was doing at work. You don't know what you're doing at home, and you don't really have any support at either home or work. That's, I think, when it's the hardest.
What do you think of the lean-in philosophy?
There's a set of women who read it and say, you know what, this is really, really helpful for me. And then I think there are other women who have said, you know what, I've made a really conscientious choice not to lean in, that I want to be able to spend more time with my family. I want to be able to spend more time not working. Mm-hmm. And so I think sometimes those women, find it offensive or disagree with it. But, look, I think of it as a business book for women. Mm-hmm. And so, not everyone wants to be in business. Not everybody wants to lean in. And I think that's fine. And I think Sheryl was really open about that in her book. This book isn't for everyone, but to the extent that you do want to, or that you have to, there are many women that have to be working. I think she has lots of great points about how to ask for a salary, go advocate for yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I think that it really applies to a lot of women who want to work or have to work.
What about in the places where there are still barriers, like you can't lean in if the door is nailed shut?
Well, I think there are lots of ways the world could change to make things easier for women. But the reality is those things get changed by having more women in the workforce, right? So summer camps. So when I was growing up, I don't remember there being summer camps. We just stayed home all day and did nothing. But now there are so many choices, like karate camp, computer camp, art camp, design camp. And so I think that's a way that the market has responded to, there are all these parents who want their kids to be able to do activities during the summer. Here's an opportunity for you.
How big a problem do you think it is that women are so underrepresented in technology?
I think it's a big issue for the world because it means that we're missing voices, we're missing innovation from women who could be creating all these great products and ideas and services. I think tech is missing out, and it's a problem for women. It's a problem for women because you look at it and say, women have made a lot of strides in the workforce, and here is this huge economic driver of change, and women are not participating in it. If tech is what's driving the new jobs, if it's what's driving change, if it's what's driving influence, and women are not part of it, then they're not part of that change, and that's a problem.
YouTube CEO Susan Wojcicki with Emily Chang on Bloomberg Studio 1.0. Well, tomorrow on Bloomberg's Eric Schatzker sits down with Google X founder Sebastian Thrun. They're in Riyadh for a global forum focusing on diversifying the Saudi economy through innovation and technology. That conversation at 7:30 in the morning, Wall Street time. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Technology, and I'm Corey Johnson in for Emily Chang. We're back to Bloomberg Studio 1.0, and the guest this week, Susan Wojcicki, the CEO of YouTube. Well, YouTube's original programming strategy is one of the great interests of Hollywood and Silicon Valley, but how much is YouTube willing to spend on content?
I will say it's the first year that we've been in it, and so we've been learning about creating shows. We've actually been really pleased in the shows that we've created and the feedback that we've gotten from our users.
What's the most successful show?
PewDiePie is our creator who has the largest number of subscribers. He has over 45 million subscribers. And he is a gamer. He plays games. He does this really funny commentary. He did a real-life game where he was put in real-life situations that were like a game.
Twitter, Amazon, Facebook are pursuing live streaming rights to sports. Do you do concerts already? Is sports something you'd consider?
Well, right now we do a lot of highlights for sports. Mm-hmm. We did that during the whole football season. They did really well on YouTube. The full game, right? Those are very competitive. There are lots of people who are bidding for them. They're really expensive. And traditional media also are competing for them. So, I think a lot will change over the next 5 years, but at this point right now, we're really just focused on those highlights so that users can see those key moments that happen during the game.
How do you think things will change over the next 5 years?
as like the online players have stronger ad models, they have stronger subscription, they'll be able to be more competitive to be able to compete for some of those sports rights.
The headlines talk about YouTube being at war with the music industry. You've got everyone from Taylor Swift to Paul McCartney saying they don't like the way you do business. Do you see a future where there's a middle ground, where everyone is happy?
First of all, working with the music industry, I've learned that there are many constituents in the music industry, and they don't all agree with each other, right? So there'll be the labels and the artists and the publishers. And so I remain really hopeful that as the online models of both subscription and advertising become more developed, that over time we are able to come to a place where everyone agrees on that future vision. And I actually think we're getting there, because we're starting to see the online subscription and streaming numbers really pick up. We're starting to see more revenue from advertising. We've paid out $3 billion to the music industry since inception. We have good growth numbers. So, overall, I think as more time goes by, it'll become more clear on what these monetization models are, and we'll be more aligned.
How are you thinking about VR? Because some people think that Google needs to buy or produce its own VR.
There are many players that are developing content right now that's VR, but I think everyone's still trying to figure out what's the best way, because this is a new medium. We have a very large collection of 360-degree video, so we're leaning in. We see this as a great way to have an experience where you can really feel immersed and really experience that story.
Harassment is a problem for a number of different technology companies, and if you look at the comments on YouTube, they're not kind. What are you doing to get that under control?
Yeah, so I think that is a really important area and something that we're putting a lot of energy into. We have community guidelines. Anything that promotes violence, anything that promotes hate, that would violate the community guidelines. And so if there's something on our platform that violates those community guidelines, or that a user feels uncomfortable with, they can flag it. It goes to a queue. It's reviewed by a YouTube employee who then will see, does it meet or not meet the community guidelines. And then if it doesn't, we will take it down. But we're trying to do more. And so one of the things that we just did out that I think is really impactful is we created this program called Creators for Change. There are creators out there who are actually taking some of these tough topics, and they're doing a great job to encourage understanding, to encourage empathy. We gave them additional funding. We have a fund of $1 million that we gave to them. We're promoting them on social media. So the idea is really, how do we get creators who are so influential in themselves to help promote these positive messages of understanding and empathy across YouTube?
Do you think the internet will become a friendlier place?
I think all technology has both good and bad sides to it, just like the real world does, right? They're friendly people and they're difficult people. I've seen all the good that has come out of it, and I've seen the way that people are able to connect with people like them on the platform that otherwise they just wouldn't have been able to connect with. The goal is, as our technology gets better, as we are better able to identify what are the right ways to enforce, that we can continue to do an even better job and promote even more the good stuff on the internet.
Where do you think YouTube will be in the next 10 years? Do you see it being more like Netflix?
I mean, our goal at YouTube is to be the platform for the next generation of media companies. And if you look at YouTube, it sort of started out with cat videos and people uploading cool things they saw in their backyard. And then we had creators, and they started actually doing it for a living. And now we have this new generation of creators that are building media companies on YouTube. And so I think if you fast forward 10 years, you're going to see that there's going to be a new generation of these media companies that have really strong followings. They're able to create amazing content. It's going to be global. They're going to be able to interact with their fans in all kinds of amazing ways. And I'm really looking forward to being part of that.
All right, Susan Wojcicki, the YouTube CEO, with Emily Chang of Bloomberg Studio 1.0. Let's turn to Apple. Looking at, get this, breaking news on Bloomberg right now, digital glasses. Mark Gurman, who helped break the story for us at Bloomberg News, joined us right now. Mark, really? Google Glass was such a success, they've got to do this?
Well, it'll be a bit different. Google Glass really came out too early. It was a $1,500 device, and it had a lot of flaws, battery life, software. Apple is now weighing and exploring their own take on glasses. This wouldn't be introduced until 2018 at the earliest, if at all. They're in the testing and exploration phase right now.
Is this about VR?
No, it's actually about AR. So VR is more of a encompassed, enclosed environment, virtual reality. The whole thing is virtual. Augmented reality would be more of maps or street view or applications where you see both the augmented reality features as well as the real life environments.
It's interesting that they are willing to pursue this with Google. There are issues with Google Glass, not just about price, but also about the sort of impact it had on society. The dubbing of the users as the glass holes. I mean, that whole notion of people didn't like these devices in society. Does Apple think it can get around this?
Absolutely. With the Apple Watch, you see they came out with several different bands and different styles, and if Apple does indeed release this product to the marketplace, I would be surprised if there weren't several different styles and colors available for any user.
Is it typical of Apple to chase these things down, or change the metaphor, float trial balloons within Apple and never pull the trigger? That was like four metaphors, I think, all in.
Right. Yeah, Apple has done this in the past. They explored TV, a full television set, pretty extensively, and they didn't end up releasing it. They chose to go with the set-top box approach and this new TV app and the web instead, all integrated. So that the same thing can be here, but according to our sources at Bloomberg, Apple is exploring this glasses product.
Good scoop, Mark Gurman. Glad to have you around. Good
Thanks.
job. Mark Gurman from Bloomberg Technology in a tie in San Francisco. All right, that does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. Tomorrow on Bloomberg, we're joined by the Tanium CEO, Orion Hindawi. Tanium is one of the fastest growing startups. Believe me, everybody is talking about this company in Silicon Valley already with a valuation of $3.5 billion. We're going to focus on how President-elect Trump could impact the security industry. Remember, all episodes of Bloomberg Technology streaming live on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech, Bloomberg TV. That's Bloomberg.